and I was pushing through that, and I came through the other side, and I see a deer body standing in front of me 35 yards away. Can't see its head, it's in some whippy stuff. And then I see another deer off to its right, and I'm looking, I'm staring at it and staring at it and staring at it, and I can't see any antlers. I'm like, well, maybe the other deer is the buck. And I'm looking at that one, I'm like, that's a smaller deer. And I look back to this one in front of me, and it's just standing there. And all of a sudden, it tips its head down. I see the rack. I'm like, that is him. So I pull up, get lined up on him, and shoot.
Welcome back to another episode of Northwoods Whitetails podcast. I'm your host, Joey Davis. This week, I sit down with Brent Dragon and John Wright. We are at an undisclosed location in a beautiful camp. It's got a lot of memories in it.
Yep.
Some sentimental value to it. How we doing, boys?
Good. We're good.
Good. Beautiful weekend.
It is. The weather finally broke.
What was the temp this morning?
55.
Yeah.
You know, when I was coming up, when you messaged me there, I sent Melissa a message. She's coming up later, and I'm like, grab me a sweatshirt.
Yeah.
I got out of my truck. I was cold. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big change.
Yeah, it is. No bugs.
Yeah. Not yet. They'll be out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long has this camp been in your...
So we've been here. My parents bought it in 1984, and I grew up here. Basically, I was 3 years old then, and they bought it, and we started coming up. So, this was a lot of my childhood I spent here, fishing in the brook. My neighbors can tell you stories about this little kid just spending hours fishing in this little 3-foot wide brook, and it's full of natives.
That's cool.
Yep, but that's how I grew up, and then transitioned to hunting up here, grouse hunting, because there used to be a lot of grouse. Woodcock, I can remember out in front here, that was all really good woodcock habitat. We had a Springer Spaniel, and we used to bird hunt. And then deer hunting came along. Spent quite a bit of time up here deer hunting. Shot a few bucks up here.
Yeah. Is this where you learned where to deer hunt?
This is where I learned how to deer hunt, and I think it was actually a good thing because it was so tough hunting. Like, I think it makes you a better hunter. Very low deer density. You just dial into those things.
Yeah.
Like, when you see sign, you really pay attention because you're not seeing it a lot.
You've got to work for it.
You got to work for it. And I think that's why Vermont guys are such good hunters, because it's tough hunting over there.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yep. No, this area is very similar to...
Yep. Northeast Kingdom.
Yeah, very similar. Very, very similar. We talked about that on the way up.
Yep. So.
Yep. So how's the summer going? What have you been up to?
Summer's good. Working.
Still working for MK?
Working for MK. Yeah, that's going good. We've been on a huge project for a year and a half now. And it's winding down now. We probably get a couple of months left there, but when I'm not working there, I'm working on projects at my house or up here or what have you. There's plenty of stuff to do. So
yeah, how many? What are we talking? $1 million? How many millions into this house that you're working on?
I don't know. The number bounces around, but it's north of 30.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's north of 30.
And you guys are doing all the finish work on the inside.
Yeah. Finish work, a lot of the cabinetry, and it's a very detailed house. The architect is very detailed, and everything has to be followed to plan. So
yeah,
the house is finished. We're done in there. The painters are in there doing all their things now, but the house is done. There's a barn, there's a boathouse. They want to get that up to par, and basically we're finishing those things up, and people get to have it.
One of the more extensive homes you've ever worked in?
Oh, yeah. I've never worked on anything like this.
Yeah.
And it's good. I like it.
Now, did MK trim pretty much the whole thing? Did they trim out the whole place?
Yep. We hired in some help. Matt hired in some help. We managed the entire interior trim. And he produced all of the cabinetry except for the kitchen, which that's kind of sounds funny, but if you saw this place, every room's got cabinetry, bench seats, and built-ins, and mud rooms, and it's pretty wild.
That's pretty cool.
Yep.
That's good. MK Woodworks out of Enfield, New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Anybody that's looking for custom cabinetry and finish work.
Yeah.
That's who John works for. Good buddy of mine, Matt Niddle.
Yep.
But let's talk about a little deer hunting. You had quite the year last year. You
ups and downs. It started off great and got into the deer early. And then we went into a lull and couldn't get things together and started jumping around states and passed up some bucks last year. It's always hard to do. I mean, it's easy to do first day out, but you start getting a couple weeks in and, you're ready to have some success.
You had phenomenal footage of that nice little buck.
Yeah.
You saw him
twice.
Yeah.
2 weeks apart. Yeah. He was hanging on this one ridge and,
What do you think his deal was? What you guys will see those of you listening, you'll see the footage here later in the fall, but he was close.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had to stop him at one point because he was less than 8 feet away from me.
And not a care in the world.
No, and I don't know if it was pretty big woods, but I don't know if he just didn't have a fear of humans or if he was just so rutted up that he was just numb. And the only reason I think that is because the second time I saw him, he would actually, when he heard me walking in the leaves, he would actually come towards me because I think he thought I was a doe. He was just looking for doe so hard that he hear rustling and he would come. It was the wildest thing I've ever seen. Like I'd seen him and I was getting out of there. It was almost dark and I'd gone 3/4 of a mile and I heard something behind me and here he comes chasing me. Like he's literally coming down my tracks and I'd stop and he'd stop. And I don't know.
Was he grunting or anything following you?
No, but the first time I saw him, he was making scrapes all around me. Like I watched him make scrapes, which is pretty cool. You don't get to see that a lot around here.
Did you have buck piss on you or anything like that? He
was just, that was his area. And
thought you were after his honeys or something.
Yeah, there was only a couple does up in there, but he was, I'm pretty sure he got shot. But
you think he did?
Yeah, I saw some drag marks when I came back from Maine, and there was probably 3 or 4 days of snow up there. And when I came back from Maine, the first week I went to Maine, I came back, there was drag marks like right where he was hanging out.
No shit.
Yeah, that's too bad. But
yeah,
I'm happy for the guy that, the person.
It was a nice little buck.
It was a nice buck. I really struggled not shooting him because he was a nice deer.
Yeah. It's a pretty cool encounter. It's phenomenal footage.
Yeah.
Phenomenal footage.
Yeah.
So you just couldn't find what you were looking for?
So New Hampshire, I'd found a good buck in New Hampshire, but the problem was there was some smaller buck around him, and I was trying to hold out for him, and every day I hunted for him, it was like I was a day late. Then the next day I'd go to where he was the day before, and you're always chasing your tail around, and we just never connected. Pretty sure he's still around.
Was he just covering a ton of ground looking for doe, or?
He was, and we didn't have very good snow, and I couldn't really dial in where he was living. I think I might have figured it out at the end of the season. I saw him coming out of some really high country. So I'm going to check that out this fall, see if there's sign of him up in there. But, there was some doe around, and he would swing down through and check them, but it wasn't every day. It was every 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
So I don't think he was living real close there.
He was just doing a big swing.
Yeah. And then he must have got hung up with some doe somewhere because he just never came back. I think those doe that I was around got bred, and that was that.
Yep.
He knew that. He didn't.
On to the next.
Yep. I'm not going back there. Waste my energy. You know,
Yeah.
they don't waste energy. Those big ones.
No, they don't.
Do not waste energy.
They're pretty efficient when it comes down to it.
Yep. They know what's going on too.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy.
Yep.
Always blows my mind.
Yep. That's for sure. Then, so what after that?
So I kind of got burnt out hunting for him. I needed a change of scenery. The biggest thing that happened in New Hampshire is the beechnut crop was massive. In my experience, beechnut in bare ground, it's tough. It's tough. Those deer are constantly moving. They don't come back to the areas because they've got food everywhere. So I got burnt out and had an opportunity to go up to Maine for a week, and I needed a change of scenery. There's supposed to be some snow up there. So I went, and that was good with some friends. And I found a really good buck up there the first day I was up there. And that very first day I was tracking him and bumped into another smaller buck, and that deer was close. He was coming up through this hardwood ridge, and I watched him for probably 15 minutes. Ended up passing him. He winded me and ran right across in front of me, but I hunted that one deer the entire week up there. I'd found his track. He was making the same loop every day. It wasn't always the same direction, but it was the same general loop. Sometimes he'd run it backwards. Sometimes he'd run it clockwise, counterclockwise. But I only saw that deer once. It was the very last day I hunted him. He was just nonstop. I could not catch up to that deer. And seems like I always get on the wrong end of his track in the morning, and then you'd run out of daylight and you'd start over the next day, and same thing. But I saw that deer the very last day, and I didn't get a shot at him because I hesitated because his rack was horrible.
Yeah.
I mean,
You think it was just a heavy-bodied younger buck, or just didn't have antlers, or what?
I don't think he was younger. I think he was probably 3.5 or 4.5.
Yeah.
I just, they just got what they got sometimes, and
that they do.
he didn't have much. And, I hesitated because, I didn't know if I bumped into another smaller deer, but only I seen one flash of him, and that was it. And then he went up over the mountain, and that was the last day, and I was worn out.
Yeah.
I was worn out. So
You and I had the same similar experience in terms of being a little surprised at the lack of antlers. That deer that I shot at Maine there that one day.
Yeah.
When he stood up, or when he was going, I hesitated.
Yeah.
I was like,
and that's
am I really tracking this buck? Like, yeah, that's got to be him.
That's all it
Better
takes.
shoot.
That 1 split second hesitation, and that was your chance sometimes.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Yeah.
So after that, came back hunting New Hampshire for the last week. Went back looking for that good buck, and never connected with him. He was just not there. I thought he would eventually stroll back through. I had some snow. He never came back through. And the very last day in New Hampshire season, I said, "Well, you beat me out every other day this year. I'm gonna let you have a break." I didn't go hunt.
Yeah.
Yep. I was worn out.
Yep.
I said, "Well, you earned it. You win this year."
Yep.
So, gave him a break. And what happened that? And then New Hampshire closed down. There was a week left in Maine for muzzleloader. They got a big snowstorm up there. So I boogied up there Monday and started looking around, and there was a couple smaller bucks around. I had fresh snow. It just stopped snowing early morning. Tracked a couple smaller bucks around, saw a good doe. Nothing really happened that day. The next day, kind of went back to the same ridge, looking around, and tracked another smaller buck. And he took me up over the ridge and down into the cedar bog. And I ended up finding a really good track. So I jumped off the smaller buck's track, got on the bigger one, even though it was older. And he was feeding. He was not in any hurry to go anywhere. I thought he was going to lay down. Then all of a sudden he completely changed his attitude, started rubbing trees and straight lining right off that ridge. I'm like, man, where is he going, you know? And he was heading for a road. I'm like, I don't want to go down there. You know, there's a couple of houses down there and stuff. And, you know, I didn't want to follow him any closer because he was headed right for a couple of houses. So I hiked back up over the ridge to my truck. I said, well, I'll just get to my truck, get out of here, and I'll drive the road and see where he crossed, see where he's heading, and try to make a game plan. Well, he never crossed the road. I was only half a mile from the road when I left him. Like, he never crossed it. I'm like, huh. And I think it was probably 3 o'clock. I'm like, oh, there's always tomorrow, you know. Actually, I was kind of tired from tracking for 2 days, so I was on my way home. I called an older friend of mine, and I said, I found a really good one. I said, he's got a good track, you know, and oh, you're going to get him. He says, you're going to get him. I said, I don't think I'm going to go back up. He goes, what? I said, I don't think I'm going to go back up tomorrow. I said, I need a break. My legs need a rest. You got to. He says, you got to go back. That deer's right there. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but I've done this before, and you burn yourself out, and then you're really junk. He's like, no, I'm telling you, you got to go back. That deer's there. He said, you could go back 2 days, and he might not be there. So he kind of talked me into it. And so I went back the next morning, drove around, still never crossed that road. Like, well, he's got to be in that same piece where I left him, because he never, like, I almost did a full loop. Like, the only section I hadn't crossed was where I could park to where I picked up his track the day before. So I parked my truck. I'm just heading for my tracks from the day before, and there's his track coming across, cut his track. I'm like, all right, here he is. And there was no mistake in it. He had a real big hoof on him. It was just one of those tracks you see, and you just don't have to wonder if it's a good deer, you know. So I tracked him, and he was feeding again, and then he'd rub trees and do some ruddy things, and then he'd start feeding again, and then he'd rub trees, and he went out into these choppins. And it was kind of a selective cut, and he's walking right out through the wide open. I'm like, oh, this must have been at nighttime, because he wouldn't have been walking through here in the daylight. I was wrong. He was bedded right out in those choppins, and there was this little clump of cedar out in those choppins. He was bedded there, so I heard him break a branch when he went, but I never saw him. And so that was the first time I jumped him. And I picked up his track right probably 7 o'clock in the morning. So I got all day on this thing. But he's heading away from these woods that I like to hunt, that I want to be in, where there's plenty of room, and he's heading up at this other ridge, and I looked on the Onyx, and there's a house. It looked like a house right on top of that ridge. I'm like, oh no, he's heading right for it. So I left his track, made a big swing, tried to get up above him, and I didn't even care if I jumped him at that point, but I just wanted to try to get him headed back the other way. So making this swing, I'm like, all right, I'm going to start heading down through these woods, and probably 30 yards away, he was standing there, and he took off running, and I see this big rag, and I'm like, whoa. Pulled up the gun, had him in the scope. Nope. Just wasn't familiar where I was. Didn't know the status of this house. Didn't know how close I was to it. And
didn't want to risk it.
Yeah, I just
felt uneasy.
Yeah, so I didn't. And turns out it wasn't even a house. It was a camp that nobody was living at. But anyways, that buck kind of skirted that camp, and he did start heading the right direction. He dipped down off that ridge, and he was heading back to those lowlands where I picked him up, and he's heading towards the original ridge where I picked up his track the day before. I'm like, good, he's heading the right direction. Now I can go. And that buck never ran out of his bed. He would take 3 or 4 bounds, and that was it. And he'd start walking. And there was another deer he picked up with it.
You think he was tired or what?
He was probably tired. He's probably tired. I don't think he had been tracked too much in his life.
Yeah.
Which makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
But there was another deer that he had picked up along the way, and that deer was behind him the entire time. So sometimes I thought I lost his track, but I hadn't. It was that other deer stepping in its tracks. I'm like, well, it's got to be another buck, you know. So anyways, we dropped in those lowlands. They set themselves up pretty good with the wind. Jumped them again, never saw them. We're going down through those lowlands, and this is one of those days all the snow was clung to the trees, and you'll see it in the footage, but like you can't walk through this stuff without getting just snow down the back of your neck, and just I was covered in snow the whole day, but I didn't care. I was having fun, you know, like what else do you want? You got fresh snow, it's quiet, like the snow's soft. You can cruise right along and be quiet. It's not crunchy. And you got a couple bucks in front of you. What else do you want? You know?
Mm-hmm.
So that was probably 11 o'clock in the morning at that point. I jumped him. I think that was the second or third. That was the third time I jumped him. And he'd crossed that lowland and he was heading back up that other mountain. And I could tell every time he wanted to lay down because he'd be going along straight and you'd have that one foot that would step out where he'd pause. And you can tell he's looking around. And he usually was within 200 yards he was bedded. So he's heading up that other ridge and that other deer's still behind him. And I see where he did that one step out. I'm like, oh, he's looking for a place. And I'm starting to look. And boy, what do I do? Do I swing up above him this time? So I swung up a little bit, and then what if he cut down the other way? So I went back to his track. I'm tracking. And I'm coming up through this mixed growth, and I see some deer pop up and go, and I see rack, and I pick up and shoot. And get up there. There's a ball of hair on the ground.
Huh.
Like, oh. And I'm looking at the hair, like, trying to figure out where it came from. I'm like, it's almost black in color. I'm like, it had to come off his back. Like, you know, if it came off his belly, there'd be some white. There was no white hair. I'm like, geez, it's either maybe brisket or off the top of his back. So, and then they picked up a third deer, and we're almost at the peak of this ridge. And I pop up over the peak, and this little forkhorn jumps up in front of me and takes off. I'm like, you know, oh, that's not him. And I'm scanning, and he wasn't there. Him and that other deer kept going. And I don't know what happened with those other two deer that were with him, but we're starting to, that was at 2:30 then. And I'm tired. I hadn't eaten all day because I was in the action, and I do that to myself all the time. If things are happening, I don't eat. But going down that other side.
Well, let me back up for a second. You don't eat?
If I've got action like that, I don't eat.
Okay, because you got a backpack full of snacks, right?
Oh, full.
All the time.
2 sandwiches, snacks. Oh, yeah.
All right, just want to clear that up.
Yeah. I usually eat a lot of calories, but if I'm in the heat of the moment like that, I just ignore it.
Yeah.
So we go up over, and they're starting to swing right, and they're kind of heading around the mountain that we just came up over. And I'm going along, and run into 5 bull moose standing there. I'm like, oh, where'd they come from? I knew they were around because I'd seen some tracks, but so they take off running and go right where the deer went. They always do that. You ever notice that?
Mm-hmm.
They always run right down the deer tracks.
Mm-hmm. And push them.
Yep. So coming around, I get out of that mixed growth, and I'm kind of out in this hardwood stuff and beech nuts, and just trucking along, and I look up through the beeches, and I see this doe standing there looking at me. Probably, I don't know, 70 yards, 80 yards away. And I'm looking, and I'm watching her, and I see this little brown thing down off to her right, probably 10 yards away, and I put the binoculars up, and I can see it's just the head of a deer. And it was almost like over a rise. And I'm looking, I see it turn its head, and I see the rack. I'm like, that's him. And I'm like, huh. Like this whole time I'm thinking that this deer that's following was another buck, and I don't know, maybe it was a doe. Like, I don't know, maybe it was a buck that lost its horns already. I don't know. So I'm like, well, that deer's got me busted. I either shoot now or it's going to blow up again. I'm not going to get a shot because he's over the rise. I can't see his body. So I get steadied up, put it on its neck, fire. Gone. Deer are gone. Both of them deer are gone. Reload, get up there, another ball of hair. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, this guy's lucky day or what? You know? And he walked out of he was actually bedded. He was bedded just over that rise, and I could just see his neck and his head. And he walked out of his bed. I'm like, whoa. He's not going far. So that was probably 3:45 in the afternoon. I'm like, I'm over the mountain from my truck. I gotta head back. I gotta go back. And I talked to you earlier in the day. I'm like, I'm on a pretty good one. You kind of gave me some motivation. Don't leave them till dark. Don't leave them till dark. And I'm not real keen on that usually because I don't like walking out in the dark, especially in woods I've never been in. Like, this was an unfamiliar situation. But I don't know what, I'll follow them a little further. And that turns into another 10 or 15 minutes. And I said, oh, whatever, I'll get back to the truck in the dark. It doesn't matter if I leave now or I leave at dark. I'm still going to be hiking out in the dark.
Yeah.
You know? So tracking them. And I came back through some sprucey stuff. And I was pushing through that, and I came through the other side, and I see a deer body standing in front of me 35 yards away. Can't see its head, and some whippy stuff. And then I see another deer off to its right, and I'm looking, I'm staring at it, and I can't see any antlers. I'm like, well, maybe the other deer is the buck. And I'm looking at that one, I'm like, that's a smaller deer. And I look back to this one in front of me, and it's just standing there. And all of a sudden it tips its head down. I see the rack. I'm like, that is him. So I pull up, get lined up on him, and shoot. And he takes like 2 bounds and stops. And I can still see his body. Like, still in that whippy stuff, but he's still standing there. I'm like, oh. And I don't know if I hit him or not. So I'm reloading, and I'm not taking it. Like, I'm staring at this deer while I'm reloading because I don't want to lose sight of him. Like, I know that's him, and if I have to shoot through that brush again, I'm not going to mistake it for another deer because I've just watched him take those 2-3 pounds. And he's still standing there. So I get reloaded, and I'm like, man, it's going to be dark in 10 minutes, you know? Like, I got to make one of the, like, I got to get a good shot at him. And so I'm like trying to pick a hole, and I take a couple steps, and I'm trying to pick a hole, and finally I see about a football size hole through the brush right in his vitals. So I lean up against a tree and fire, and he takes off, and I hear crash, crash, crash. And I'm like, oh, that sounded good. That sounded good. And I was all out of loads in my pockets, so I had to get my pack, get another load out. I get loaded up, and now I'm hustling. It's getting dark, and get down to his track. Yeah, this should be him, and I'll kind of peek my head down around the corner, and there he is piled up. It's like, I don't know if it was because I had worked so hard the last 2 weeks hunting, but I was just overcome with adrenaline and emotion, and just
the hunt.
It took over. Like, oh, wow. You know, I mean, it was a great hunt. Like, that was at 4:00 I got him. So it was an all-day hunt.
That's all you could ask for, really, after the season that you had and the effort you put into it.
And then, like, now I'm going in panic mode at the same time because my truck's over the top of this mountain. Now, I already didn't want to hunt that day because my legs were tired. And now I got to drag this deer up and over this mountain, and I'm like panicking, like, how am I going to get him out? Like, I got to figure this out. I got to call Melissa and tell her I'm not going to be home. Like, I'm going to be out here for quite a few hours, you know. And like, all these things go through your mind in this short 5-minute period, and you know, it's what we do it for, though. Like, that's what we live for. You get this great feeling of achievement, and then you're trying to figure this all out. It's almost like a sense of anxiety, but I wouldn't trade her for anything.
Yeah.
Like,
how'd you end up getting him out?
so
You have to go back up over?
I hadn't quite figured that out yet. But the day before, a couple builders, friends of mine that I used to work for, had sent me a picture of a buck they got in Maine. And they told me where they were hunting, and it was a little ways away from me, but it wasn't too far, and it's dark now. I'm like, I know they're not in the woods anymore. And I'm like, geez, I wonder if they're still up here. So I had cell service, and I called them and said, Mark, you're not by any chance still around up here hunting, are you? He goes, yeah, we're still up here. I'm like, you wouldn't want to do me a huge favor, because I looked at Onyx and I saw that, like, there was a power line of road down below me. He's like, I said, I just shot a really nice buck, and but I'm over the wrong side of a mountain. Like, I got to go up and over the mountain to get back to my truck. And I said, I don't know what you guys are doing tonight. If you're tired, you're going to bed, I understand it, but if you're looking for something to do, I could use a ride. I said, I can have this deer down out of here. You won't have to drag it all. He's like, yeah. He's like, well, and it worked out perfect. I did probably the fastest field dressing job I've ever done in my life, and hooked onto that thing and just barreled down out of there. It was good drag. I mean, that real soft snow, they skid down out pretty good.
Yeah.
And I hit that power line, and those two guys were standing there, and their truck was 50 yards away. It was dark. I mean, it was dark, but
it's a good story.
Yeah.
That's a really good story.
Yeah. So he dropped his tailgate, and to load, we were getting ready to load my deer in their truck, and he dropped his tailgate, and the deer they shot the day before was still in their truck because they had no place to hang it.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, they were staying at a motel. I'm like, oh, this is pretty cool.
That's cool.
So,
That's
anyways.
Cool. Well, hard work.
Yeah, and I thought that deer, judging by his track, I thought he was a really good buck, and he was. I mean, but he was just bag of bones. He weighed 165 pounds.
Yeah.
But
he had a pretty good set of antlers on him.
Yeah, he was 130-something inch deer, low 130s, I think.
Yeah. 8-pointer, 9-pointer?
Call him an 8-pointer. He had a little nub there, but I don't know if it would call it a point. But
yeah. You getting him set up?
Yeah. Yep. It was a pretty memorable hunt, and that's kind of what I like to mount deer for, just to remember those hunts. So
yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
that's good.
It was fun.
Pretty good story.
It was. Yeah.
It's prime example of just not giving up, right? Even though you're tired, you're exhausted.
Yep.
You had the conditions you need. You exhausted every avenue that there was, and it paid off.
And in that last 15 minutes, like, I could have headed to the truck after I shot him that last time and come back the next day, but boy, things change in 15 minutes.
They do.
Yep.
You can pretty much guarantee that late in the day he's going to be on his feet.
I'm starting to notice that.
Whether he's got his head in the snow digging for feed or he's moving to where there is.
Yep.
Late in the afternoon, they're always on their feet.
Yep.
And if you can catch him.
Yeah. I think I've made a lot of mistakes over the year by leaving in that last hour, head back for the truck. And sometimes you have to. I mean, but
yeah, sometimes it's you get yourself in a bad situation.
Yeah. In 2019, I did have myself in a bad situation. I shot a deer, a really nice one, and I was at the top of a mountain. I ended up having to leave that deer overnight.
Yeah.
And it was the same time of day. It was like 10, 15 minutes before dark. But wouldn't have got him if I didn't hunt that late.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad we made the trek over.
Yeah, it was good having you guys will stop by.
Yep. We'll let you get back to work.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, John. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yep.
No one can save you. You better run.